The bulldozer's engine roared to life at 3 a.m., its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin blades. Karen Mitchell stood frozen at her bedroom window, watching in horror as her neighbor's pool, the one she'd spent months demanding be removed, disappeared into the earth, along with something far more valuable than she'd ever imagined. By dawn, the excavation would reveal a secret that would destroy her perfect suburban life forever. And she'd realize that some victories come with a price too steep to pay. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as David Chen stood in his backyard, coffee mug in hand, surveying the pristine blue rectangle that had become the center of his neighborhood war. The pool sparkled innocently in the early light, its surface disturbed only by the gentle hum of the filtration system he'd installed last spring. "Daddy, can we swim before school?" His 8-year-old daughter Emma bounced beside him, her backpack already slung over her shoulders. "Not today, sweetheart. Water's still too cold." David ruffled her dark hair, but his smile faded as he spotted the familiar figure marching across the adjoining yard. Karen Mitchell moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd appointed herself the neighborhood's moral guardian. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her lips were pressed into the thin line that had become her default expression since the pool controversy began 6 months ago. "David," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured authority that made his jaw clench. "We need to talk now." Emma tugged at his sleeve. "I don't like the mean lady, Daddy." "Go inside and get your lunch from Mom," David said quietly, never taking his eyes off Karen as she approached his fence line. "Tell her I'll drive you to school in a few minutes." Karen waited until Emma disappeared through the sliding glass door before launching into her familiar tirade. "This has gone on long enough. That pool is a menace, and I'm done being reasonable about it." David set his coffee mug on the patio table with deliberate calm. "Karen, we've been through this. I have all the permits. The pool is entirely on my property, and it meets every safety code in the book." "Safety codes?" Karen's voice rose to a pitch that could shatter glass. "My property values are plummeting because of that eyesore. The noise from your pump keeps me awake at night, and don't get me started on the parade of neighborhood kids tracking mud through my flower beds. The pump runs for 4 hours a day, and it's quieter than your air conditioning unit." David's patience was wearing thin. "As for the kids, they use the front gate. They're not even near your property." Karen's face flushed red. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Moving in here with your fancy job and your perfect little family, thinking you can do whatever you want." The racial undertone wasn't lost on David. He'd heard it before, ever directly, but always lurking beneath Karen's complaints. The way she emphasized your people when talking about property maintenance, the pointed comments about changing neighborhoods at HOA meetings. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" David's voice carried a dangerous edge. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm telling you." Karen pulled a manila folder from under her arm. "I've been documenting everything. Noise violations increased. Traffic, the mess those children make. I've got photos, timestamps, witness statements from other neighbors." David almost laughed. "Witness statements? You mean the Johnsons, who asked if they could use the pool for their anniversary party? Or the Garcias, who've been asking for swimming lessons for their daughter?" "I've got support from the people who matter in this neighborhood," Karen snapped. "People who've been here longer than 5 minutes and actually care about maintaining standards. David repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Right?" Karen's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm filing a formal complaint with the city. Retroactive permit violations, environmental concerns, zoning issues. I've already spoken to Councilwoman Bradley about fast-tracking the review process." Threat landed like a physical blow. David knew Bradley. She was Karen's book club friend and had been less than welcoming when David's family moved to Maple Street. The idea of fighting City Hall with a potentially biased councilwoman made his stomach turn. "Even if you somehow got the permits revoked," David said carefully, "removing an in-ground pool is a massive undertaking. You're talking about weeks of construction, thousands of dollars. Not my problem." Karen's satisfaction was palpable. "You should have thought about that before you decided to turn our quiet neighborhood into a public swimming facility." "Karen, listen to yourself. You're talking about destroying something that brings joy to dozens of kids, something that makes our community stronger, all because you can't stand the sound of children laughing. Those aren't my children laughing, Karen shot back. And this isn't my problem to solve. You built it. You deal with the consequences. David felt something cold settle in his chest. You really don't care who you hurt, do you? I care about my property values and my peace of mind. Everything else is secondary. Karen tucked the folder back under her arm. You have 2 weeks to start the removal process voluntarily, or I'm moving forward with a city complaint and David. She paused at his gate. Don't think your little sob story about community building is going to work on everyone. Some of us remember what this neighborhood was like before. People like you moved in. There it was. The mask finally slipped completely. David watched her walk away, her head held high like a conqueror, surveying her domain. Through the kitchen window, he could see his wife Sarah helping Emma with her backpack, both of them laughing at something on the morning news. They'd moved to Maple Street because it seemed like the perfect place to raise their daughter. Good. Schools, tree-lined streets, neighbors who waved from their porches. Sarah had fallen in love with the house's big backyard, already envisioning summer barbecues and birthday parties around the pool they'd planned to install. Everything okay? Sarah appeared at the sliding door, her expression concerned. Karen's escalating, David said quietly. She's threatening to go to the city. Sarah's face darkened. Can she do that? She can try. But Sarah, ... David turned. To face his wife fully, I think we need to consider that she might actually succeed. Bradley's been looking for reasons to make life difficult for us since we moved in. So what do? David looked back at the pool, then at the house where Karen had disappeared, her threat hanging in the air like smoke. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to let her win just because she can't stand having neighbors who don't look like her. What David didn't know was that Karen had already made her first call to the city, and Councilwoman Bradley had been very interested in discussing quality of life concerns in the Maple Street area. The wheels were already in motion, and by the time David realized how serious Karen's threat really was, it would be too late to stop what was coming. The war for Maple Street had officially begun, and neither side was prepared for the casualties that lay ahead. 3 days later, David found the official notice taped to his front door like a scarlet letter. The city seal glared up at him from the crisp white paper, and his hands trembled slightly as he read the bureaucratic language that would reshape his family's life. Notice of permit violation and mandatory inspection, Sarah, he called, his voice echoing through their house. You need to see this. His wife appeared at the top of the stairs, her face already pale from the tone in his voice. What is it? They're claiming the pool was built without proper permits. David's voice was hollow as he scanned the document. Mandatory inspection, scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. if violations are confirmed. We have 72 hours to begin removal or face daily fines of $500. Sarah sank onto the stairs, her hand pressed to her mouth. But we have all the permits. You kept every single piece of paperwork. Apparently, there's a question about the original soil survey. They're saying the environmental impact assessment was insufficient. David looked up from the notice, his jaw tight with anger. This is Karen's doing. She's got them questioning everything retroactively. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her school backpack sliding off her shoulder. Daddy, why do you look scared? The innocence in her voice cut through David like a knife. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults use the system to hurt people they don't like? That her favorite place in the world, the pool where she'd learned to swim, where she'd celebrated her birthday, where half the neighborhood kids gathered, on summer afternoons might be torn away because of one woman's hatred. It's just grown-up stuff, sweetheart, Sarah said quickly, forcing a smile. Why don't you go start your homework? Emma lingered, her dark eyes moving between her parents' faces with the intuition children possess for detecting adult deception. Finally, she nodded and trudged upstairs, her small footsteps heavy on the wooden stairs. We need a lawyer, Sarah whispered. With what money? You know how much we put into the pool installation? David crumpled the notice in his fist. And even if we fight this and win, Karen will just find another angle. She's not going to stop. Oh! We're just going to give up. Let her win. David didn't answer immediately. Through the kitchen window, he could see Karen in her backyard, watering her rose bushes with the satisfied smile of someone whose plans were falling into place. She caught his eye and gave him a little wave, as if they were friendly neighbors. Sharing a pleasant morning, the gesture filled him with a rage so pure it frightened him. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor Tom Rodriguez. "Hey man, heard about the pool situation. Bunch of us are pretty pissed about this. Karen's been going door to door trying to get signatures on some petition. Most people told her to buzz off, but thought, you should know." More texts followed in rapid succession. Jenny Kim from 2 streets over. "This is insane. My kids love your pool. Is there anything we can do to help? Mike and Susan Johnson, we're behind you 100%. Karen's been a nightmare since she moved here. Time someone stood up to her." Within an hour, David's phone was buzzing constantly. Neighbors he barely knew were reaching out, offering support, sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment. Mrs. Patterson from the corner house called to tell him about Karen's campaign to get the Garcia's food truck banned from parking on their own property. The Williamses described months of complaints about their teenage son's basketball hoop. "She's been doing this to everyone," Sarah marveled as David shared the messages. "We're not the first." "No," David said grimly, "but we might be the test. Case, if she can get our pool removed, she'll know she can push anyone around." The next morning, Inspector Bradley No, relation to the councilwoman, despite Karen's obvious disappointment, arrived at exactly 9 a.m. He was a tired-looking man in his 50s who seemed genuinely apologetic about the situation. "Look, Mr. Chen," he said as they walked around the pool, "I've been doing this job for 20 years. Your installation is textbook perfect. Whoever did this work knew what they were doing. Then what's the problem?" Bradley sighed and pulled out his tablet. "The problem is politics. Someone with influence made a call, and now I have to find something wrong or my boss is going to ask uncomfortable questions." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "Are you saying you're going to fabricate violations?" "I'm saying I'm going to do my job by the book, which means I have to investigate every single claim in this complaint." Bradley's voice was carefully neutral. "Your soil survey was done by Henderson Environmental. Good company, solid reputation. But they're now claiming there might have been issues with the initial groundwater testing." "Might have been, Mr. Chen?" "This is off the record, but Henderson got a call yesterday from someone claiming to represent your interests. They were told there were questions about their original report and that they might be liable for any environmental damage." David stared at him. "Someone impersonated me. I can't prove that. But Henderson is now saying they need to re-examine their findings before they'll stand behind their original assessment." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Karen hadn't just filed a complaint, she'd systematically undermined the very foundation of his permits by spreading fear and misinformation. "So what happens now?" Bradley looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Without Henderson's backing, I have to recommend permit suspension pending a new environmental assessment. That's a 60-day process minimum, and during that time, we can't use the pool." "That's right. And if the new assessment finds any issues, even minor ones, removal becomes mandatory." David watched Inspector Bradley pack up his equipment, the man's obvious distress providing little comfort. Through the fence, he could see Karen pretending to tend her garden while clearly listening to every word. That evening, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, their daughter asked the question David had been dreading. "Is the mean lady going to take our pool away?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. "We're going to fight to keep it, sweetheart. But what if she wins?" Sarah looked helplessly at David, who knelt beside Emma's bed. "Then we'll figure out something else. But Emma, I want you to remember something. Sometimes grown-ups do things that aren't fair, and it's not because you did anything wrong. It's because they have problems in their hearts that make them want to hurt other people." Emma considered this with the seriousness of childhood. "Is that why she hates us?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight. How do you explain racism to a child? How do you tell her that someone wants to destroy her happiness simply because of the color of her skin? "Some people are afraid of things that are different," David said carefully. "And when they're afraid, they sometimes try to hurt those things, instead of trying to understand them." After Emma fell asleep, David and Sarah sat in their kitchen, staring out at the pool that now felt like a monument to their naivety. They'd believed that hard work and good intentions would be enough. They'd thought that following the rules would protect them. David's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is just the beginning." Remove the pool voluntarily, and I might consider letting you stay in the neighborhood. He showed the message to Sarah, whose face went white. She's threatening to force us out of our home, Sarah whispered. David stared at the message, something cold and calculating settling in his mind. Karen had just made a critical error. She'd revealed that this was never about the pool at all, it was about driving them away entirely, which meant she'd crossed a line from neighbor, dispute, into something much more serious, and that gave David options he hadn't had before. Pack a bag for you and Emma, he said quietly. What? Why? Because Karen thinks she knows what kind of man I am. She thinks I'm going to roll over and accept whatever she dishes out. David's voice was calm, but Sarah recognized the dangerous undertone. She's about to learn that she's been playing a game with someone who knows all the rules she's forgotten. David Chen hadn't always been a suburban father with a mortgage and a minivan. Before Emma was born, before the quiet life on Maple Street, he'd been something else entirely, a forensic accountant, specializing in corporate fraud investigations. He'd spent years unraveling complex schemes, following paper trails that corrupt executives thought they'd buried forever. The skills never really left you. They just went dormant until you needed them again. At 2 a.m., while Sarah and Emma slept peacefully in a hotel room across town, David sat in his home office surrounded by printouts, legal documents, and his laptop screen glowing with public records. Karen Mitchell had made the mistake of threatening his family, and now he was going to find out exactly who she really was. The first discovery came within an hour. Karen's property taxes showed a curious discrepancy. She'd been claiming a homestead exemption on her Maple Street house, while simultaneously claiming the same exemption on a condo in Florida. That was textbook tax fraud worth at least $15,000 in penalties and back taxes. But that was just the beginning. David's old contacts in the financial investigation world still owed him favors. A quick call to Marcus Webb, now working at the IRS, revealed that Karen Mitchell had been flagged for audit 3 times in the past 5 years, but had somehow managed to slip through the cracks each time. Her returns are works of fiction, Marcus told him over a secure video call. She's claiming business expenses for a consulting company that doesn't seem to actually exist. Writing off her entire house as a home office, the works, but she's got connections. Every time we start digging, we get a call from someone higher up telling us to prioritize other cases. What kind of connections? Political ones. Her ex-husband is Richard Mitchell's state senator, Judiciary Committee. Even though they're divorced, she still has pull. David felt pieces clicking into place. That explains how she got to Councilwoman Bradley so fast. Dave, be careful with this. Karen Mitchell isn't just some cranky neighbor. She's got a history of using the legal system to destroy people she doesn't like. 3 years ago, she got a Hispanic family's business shut down by filing false health code violations. Last year, she had an elderly black man's property condemned through bogus safety complaints. The pattern was becoming clear. Karen wasn't just a racist. She was a systematic predator who'd weaponized bureaucracy to drive out anyone she considered undesirable. Send me everything you have on her, David said. I can't officially Marcus. She's threatening my 8-year-old daughter. She's trying to force my family out of our home because we're not white enough for her neighborhood. How much evidence do you need? 20 minutes later, David's inbox chimed with a file containing 5 years of Karen Mitchell's financial records, cross-referenced with public complaints she'd filed against various neighbors and local businesses. The scope of her campaign was staggering. 47 official complaints filed with the city over 3 years, 31 business license challenges, 16 property disputes, and in every single case, the target had been a minority family or business owner. But Karen had gotten sloppy. Success had made her overconfident, and overconfidence led to mistakes. The biggest mistake was documented in her own handwriting, a notebook found during a public records request, where she'd meticulously planned her attacks. David's name appeared on page 43. Along with detailed notes about his family's daily routines, Emma's school schedule, and a timeline for removal strategies. The final entry made David's blood run cold. If pool removal doesn't work, CPS complaint about unsafe swimming conditions around children. Anonymous tip about suspected child endangerment should be sufficient to create custody concerns. She was planning to attack his family through their daughter. David's hands shook as he photographed every page of the notebook Erin had just signed. Her own death warrant, metaphorically speaking, by dawn. David had assembled a file that would have made his old FBI contacts proud. Karen Mitchell wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance, she was a serial harasser, engaged in systematic civil rights violations, tax fraud, and conspiracy to file false reports. But the most damaging discovery came from a deep dive into property. Records. Karen's house, it turned out, had been purchased through a shell company that received funding from a white supremacist organization called Heritage Preservation Fund. The group had been buying properties in diverse neighborhoods specifically to install operatives who would drive out minority residents. Karen wasn't just a racist neighbor, she was a paid operative in an organized campaign of ethnic cleansing. Revelation changed everything. This wasn't about one woman's personal prejudices anymore. This was about a coordinated attack on American families, funded by hate groups and enabled by corrupt officials. David picked up his phone and called the one person who could help him fight fire with fire. Janet Morrison, Civil Rights Division, FBI, this is Chen. The familiar voice on the other end was immediately alert. David, Jesus, I haven't heard from you in 3 years. What's going on? I need to report a federal civil rights conspiracy. And Janet, I think you're going to want to hear this. An hour later, David sat across from Special Agent Morrison in a downtown coffee shop. Watching her flip through his meticulously organized evidence file, her expression grew darker with each page. "This is unbelievable," she murmured. "We've been tracking Heritage Preservation Fund for 2 years, but we could never prove direct coordination with their neighborhood operatives. Well, now you can." Karen documented everything herself. She's probably planning to write a how-to manual for other racist housewives. Janet looked up from the notebook. "David, you realize what this means. If we move on this, it's going to be a major federal case. Media attention, court proceedings, the works. Your family's going to be in the spotlight. My family's already under attack. At least this way, we fight back. And your pool." David smiled grimly. "That's the beautiful part." Karen demanded that I remove the pool immediately, right? She kept insisting I had to do it overnight if I really wanted to solve the problem. So I'm going to do exactly what she asked for. I'm going to remove that pool tonight, and when I do, I'm going to find something very interesting buried underneath it. Janet stared at him. "What did you bury under your pool, David?" "Nothing." But Karen doesn't know that. See, there's a reason she was so desperate to get that pool removed quickly, according to the property records. Her house used to belong to a family called the Washingtonza, black family, who mysteriously disappeared. In 1987, after claiming they were being harassed by white supremacists, Janet's eyes widened. "You think?" "I think Karen knows exactly what happened to the Washington family. And I think she's terrified that someday someone might start digging in the right places and find evidence of what really happened to them." David pulled out his phone and showed Janet a text message he'd prepared but hadn't sent yet. "What's that?" "A message to Karen, telling her I'm removing the pool tonight as requested, and that I'll be doing a complete excavation of the backyard to make sure there are no environmental issues before I fill it in." Janet shook her head in amazement. "You're going to make her think you might accidentally dig up evidence of a murder." She demanded I remove the pool overnight. She's about to get exactly what she asked for. David's finger hovered over the send button. "The question is, what do you think Karen's going to do when she realizes her own demand might expose the very thing she's spent decades trying to hide?" At 11:47 p.m., Karen Mitchell's phone buzzed with a text message that would unravel 30 years of carefully buried secrets. "You win, Karen, removing the pool tonight as you demanded. Excavation crew starts at midnight, doing a complete dig to check for environmental issues before filling it in. Thanks for pushing me to do the right thing." Karen's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against her kitchen floor as the implications crashed over her. Through her window, she could already see the floodlights setting up. In David's backyard, the silhouettes of workers unloading equipment. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, finding the number she'd hoped never to use again. "It's me," she whispered when the gravelly voice answered. "We have a problem, Karen Jesus. It's midnight." "What?" "They're digging up the Chen property. Right now, They're going to find slow down. What are you talking about? Karen pressed her face against the window, watching in horror as a small excavator rumbled into David's backyard. The new family I told you about, the ones with the pool. He's having it removed tonight, and they're doing a full excavation. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Karen wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Ray Hoffman's voice came back, colder than winter. You stupid bitch. I told you to leave that family alone. I told you the Chen property was off limits. You said all the properties were fair game as long as we followed the playbook. I said most properties were fair game. The Chen lot was specifically excluded because of what's buried there. Jesus Christ, Karen, do you even remember what we did? Of course she remembered. The nightmare still woke her up sometimes, even after all these years. Marcus Washington had been getting too close to the truth about their operation. The young journalist had been investigating patterns of minority families being driven from their homes, and he'd figured out the connection between Heritage Preservation Fund and the systematic harassment campaign. Marcus had been about to publish his exposé when he'd simply disappeared, along with his wife Jennifer and their 6-year-old son. The bodies, Karen whispered. They're going to find the bodies, not if we stop them first. How many workers are there? Karen counted the figures moving around David's yard, maybe 6 or 7, plus that bastard Chen is out there directing them. Okay, here's what we do. You call the city emergency line, report unauthorized construction activity, tell them there's dangerous excavation happening without permits, environmental hazards, whatever. Get them to shut it down tonight, Ray. It's almost midnight. Who's going to Councilwoman Bradley owes us favors? Call her directly. Tell her it's an emergency. Karen's fingers flew over her phone screen, but Bradley's number went straight to voicemail. Then again and again. She's not answering? Then we do this the hard way. I'm calling the boys. What boys? You think Heritage Preservation Fund just sends strongly worded letters. We've got people who handle situations like this. Physical solutions to political problems. The line went dead, leaving Karen staring at her phone in growing panic. Through the window, she could see the excavation had already begun. The small backhoe was carefully removing sections of concrete around the pool's edge, while workers directed floodlights into the growing hole. She had to do something. Anything. Karen threw on a robe and rushed outside, marching across her lawn with the fury of desperation. David Chen. He looked up from where he was consulting with the excavation foreman, his face calm and unreadable in the harsh work lights. Karen, I'm surprised you're still awake. You can't do this. It's the middle of the night. There are noise ordinances. Actually, I pulled an emergency removal permit this afternoon. Environmental hazard situation, apparently there were concerns. About groundwater contamination affecting the whole neighborhood, David's smile was sharp as a knife. I'm sure you understand the urgency. This is insane. You're going to wake up the entire street. Funny thing, David mused, looking around at the neighboring houses. I knocked on every door this evening to let folks know what was happening. Every single family on this block said they were happy to deal with one night of noise if it meant resolving the pool situation permanently. Karen felt the world tilting beneath her feet. Every family, well, everyone except you. But then, I figured you'd be thrilled. This is exactly what you wanted, right? Pool gone overnight. Complete excavation to make sure there are no lingering issues. The backhoe's engine growled as it pulled up another section of concrete. Karen watched in horror as dirt flew each scoop, bringing them closer to secrets that had stayed buried for 3 decades. Wait, she screamed. You have to stop. There might be utilities down there, gas lines. You could cause an explosion. The excavation foreman looked up, his weathered face concerned. Ma'am, we checked with the utility companies before we started. Everything's been marked and cleared. But you don't understand. There could be other things down there. Historical artifacts, maybe. This area has significance. David stepped closer, his voice low enough that only Karen could hear. What kind of significance, Karen? What exactly are you worried we might find? Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. How could she possibly explain without incriminating herself? Mr. Chen, the foreman called out. We've hit something here. Looks like there might be some kind of old foundation or something. Want us to keep going? Karen's knees nearly buckled. No, stop digging, please. I'm begging you. Karen, David said softly, You spent months demanding that I remove this pool. You threatened my family. You got the city involved. You made our lives hell until I agreed to do exactly what you wanted. And now that I'm doing it, you want me to stop? I changed my mind. The pool is fine. You can keep it. Oh, but I can't. See, once the city gets involved with environmental concerns, I have to follow through. They'll want to see documentation that we did a complete remediation. David's eyes glittered in the floodlights. Unless, of course, you have some specific knowledge about what might be down there that could help us avoid any unpleasant discoveries. The trap was perfect, and Karen knew it. If she admitted knowledge of what was buried beneath the pool, she'd be confessing to murder. If she stayed silent, the excavation would continue until the bodies were found. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Boys are en route. Keep them digging until we arrive." Our Karen stared at the message, her blood turning to ice. Ray was sending killers to David's backyard. The situation was about to escalate from cover-up to massacre. "David," she whispered urgently, "you need to get your workers out of here, right now." "Why would I do that?" "Because there are people coming who will hurt them, who will hurt you." David studied her face in the harsh light, seeing genuine terror there for the first time. "What people, Karen?" Before she could answer, the rumble of motorcycle engines echoed through the quiet neighborhood. 4 men in leather jackets pulled into David's driveway, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. Karen's phone rang. "Ray's number?" Perfect timing. His voice rasped through the speaker, loud enough for David to hear. "Now we can clean up this whole mess permanently." The lead biker removed his helmet, revealing a face covered in white supremacist tattoos. His smile was cold as winter death. David stepped forward, his hands visible and empty, but his voice carried an authority that made even the tattooed biker pause. "I'm David Chen, and you gentlemen are trespassing on private property." The biker's laugh was harsh as broken glass. "Trespassing? That's rich. We're here to solve a neighborhood problem. The only problem here," David said calmly, "is that you brought motorcycles to a chess match." The biker's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "What the hell does that mean?" David pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. Suddenly, floodlights blazed to life from every house on the street. Windows that had appeared dark moments before revealed FBI agents in tactical gear, rifles trained on the 4 bikers. "It means," David continued, as red laser dots danced across the bikers' chests, "that you just rode into a federal sting operation." Agent Janet Morrison's voice echoed through a bullhorn from the Johnsons' porch. "FBI, drop your weapons and get on the ground." Now, the lead biker spun around, finally realizing they'd walked into a trap. "What the fuck?" Ray Hoffman sends. "His regards," David called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Oh wait, that's right. Ray's been in federal custody since 6 p.m. today. Along with Councilwoman Bradley and about 12 other Heritage Preservation Fund operatives." Karen's face went white as snow. "That's impossible. You really thought I was some naive suburban dad who'd just roll over when you threatened my family." David's smile was easy. "Karen, I spent 5 years hunting down organized criminals for the FBI. Did you seriously believe I wouldn't recognize a conspiracy when it was happening in my own backyard?" The excavation foreman, who Karen now realized was built like a linebacker, off his work helmet to reveal an earpiece and tactical vest. "All subjects secured. Agent Morrison, those aren't construction workers." Karen whispered in horror. "FBI tactical team," David confirmed. "The excavation was bait to get you to panic and call in your backup, which you did beautifully." Agent Morrison approached, her weapons still trained on the bikers, who were now face down on David's lawn. "David Chen." David looked down at Karen, who had collapsed onto her knees. In the dirt, Karen meets Special Agent Janet Morrison, Civil Rights Division. She's been tracking Heritage Preservation Fund for 2 years, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. "The notebook," Karen breathed. "You found my notebook." "Found it." "Karen, you gave it to the city as part of your official complaint documentation. Every single page, including your detailed plans to destroy minority families." David crouched down to meet her eyes, including your admission that you were involved in the disappearances of Marcus, Jennifer, and Tommy Washington. Karen's composure finally shattered completely. "We didn't mean for it to go that far. Marcus was getting too close, and Ray said we just needed to scare him." But then you murdered a family," Agent Morrison finished coldly, "including a 6-year-old boy." The truth hung in the night air like poison. Around the yard, neighbors who had pretended to sleep through the excavation began emerging from their houses. Tom Rodriguez, the Johnsons, Jenny Kim, the Garcias, even elderly Mrs. Patterson from the corner house. They'd all known, they'd all been part of the trap. The whole neighborhood. Karen's voice was hollow with defeat. "Turns out," David said, standing up, "when you spend years terrorizing everyone on the street, they're pretty eager for payback, especially when the FBI asks for their help." Tom Rodriguez stepped forward, his face grim. "Karen, you filed 14 noise complaints against my family in 2 years. You tried to get my daughter's quinceañera shut down. You called immigration services on us, even though we've been citizens for 20 years. Jenny Kim joined him. You reported my mother-in-law to Adult Protective Services, claiming we were abusing her. She was so upset she stopped speaking to us for months." One by one, Karen's victims stepped forward, their voices joining in a chorus of the damage she'd inflicted over the years. The elderly couple whose food truck she'd gotten banned. The teenage boy whose basketball hoop she'd had removed. The young mother whose children she'd reported to CPS for suspicious bruises that turned out to be perfectly normal playground scrapes. "We've been documenting everything for months," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice shaking with decades of suppressed anger. "Every racist comment, every false report, every attempt to drive good families out of our neighborhood." David turned back to Karen, who sat crumpled in the dirt like a broken doll. "You wanted to know what kind of man I am? I'm the kind who protects his family. I'm also the kind who believes in justice." Agent Morrison stepped forward with handcuffs. "Karen Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights, accessory to murder, tax evasion, filing false police reports, and about 30 other federal charges." "Wait," Karen gasped, looking up at David with desperate eyes. "The bodies, are they really?" David's expression softened slightly, the first hint of genuine emotion he'd shown all night. "The Washington family isn't buried under my pool. Karen, Marcus, Jennifer, and Tommy Washington are alive and well, living in Seattle under assumed names in witness protection." Karen stared at him in shock. "What?" "Marcus figured out what you and Ray were planning. He contacted the FBI, and they faked the family's disappearance to protect them while building a case against Heritage Preservation Fund. Grew harder, but you didn't know that. For 30 years, you've lived with the guilt of thinking you'd helped murder a child. And that guilt made you sloppy, paranoid, desperate to control everything around you." The full scope of her manipulation crashed over Karen like a tidal wave. There had never been any but the psychological pressure, the constant fear of discovery, the escalating need to control her environment had all been based on a lie that had eaten her alive from the inside. The excavation was never about finding evidence of murder, Agent Morrison explained as she secured the handcuffs. It was about getting you to confess to conspiracy and bringing your enforcement arm out into the open. David looked around at his neighbors, his real neighbors, who had stood with him against a campaign of terror that had lasted years. "Everyone okay?" A chorus of affirmatives echoed through the yard. Emma appeared at the sliding glass door in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, why are there so many cars?" Sarah emerged behind her, having returned from the hotel as planned once the all-clear signal was given. "Just some neighborhood business, sweetheart. Everything's fine now." As the FBI led Karen and the bikers away, David stood in his backyard. Surrounded by floodlights and fake excavation equipment, his pool remained untouched, sparkling under the artificial lights like a symbol of victory. Tom Rodriguez walked over and clapped him on the shoulder. "So what do we do with all this FBI equipment?" David grinned, the first genuine smile he'd worn in months. "I think we're having a neighborhood pool party tomorrow. Everyone's invited." But as the FBI vehicles disappeared into the night, David caught sight of a familiar figure watching from the shadows across the street. A man in an expensive suit who didn't belong in their middle-class neighborhood. Someone who'd been too smart to get caught up in tonight's trap. The Heritage Preservation Fund had more operatives than just Ray Hoffman and Karen Mitchell, and some of them were still free, still dangerous, and now they knew exactly who David Chen really was. The war for Maple Street was won, But the larger battle was just beginning. 6 months later, David Chen stood in his backyard watching Emma and a dozen neighborhood kids play in the pool that had become the heart of Maple Street. The late summer sun cast dancing reflections across the water, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air where once there had been only tension and fear. "Daddy, watch this," Emma called out, executing a perfect cannonball that soaked half the kids nearby. Their delighted screams echoed off the houses, a symphony of joy that would have driven Karen Mitchell to file another noise complaint. But Karen was in federal prison, serving a 25-year sentence for conspiracy, civil rights violations, and her role in the Heritage Preservation Fund operation. Ray Hoffman had received life without parole. Councilwoman Bradley was facing her own trial for corruption and abuse of office. The mysterious figure in the expensive suit had turned out to be FBI agent Marcus Washington, the supposedly murdered journalist who'd been working undercover for 3 decades to bring down the entire network. His death had been the perfect cover to infiltrate white supremacist organizations from the inside. The Heritage Preservation Fund was finished completely. "Mr. Chen," a young voice interrupted his thoughts. David turned to see a nervous-looking teenager standing at his gate. He didn't recognize. "Can I help you? I'm Tyler Morrison. I live over on Oak Street," my mom said. "She said you might be able to help me with something." David studied the boy's face, noting the worry lines that seemed too old for someone barely What kind of help? "There's this family in our neighborhood, the Patels. They just moved in from India, and some of the neighbors are giving them trouble, making complaints, calling the police on them for stupid stuff." Tyler's hands clenched into fists. "It's not right, but I don't know what to do about it." David felt a familiar fire kindle in his chest. "What kind of complaints?" "Their food smells weird, their music is too loud, they have too many visitors." "Stuff like that." "But Mr. Chen, I've been there. Their food smells amazing. They only play music during the day, and the too many visitors are just their extended family coming for dinner on Sundays." Sarah appeared at David's shoulder, having overheard the conversation. "Tyler, have your parents tried talking to these neighbors directly?" The boy's face darkened. "My parents are part of the problem. They're the ones leading the complaints." David and Sarah exchanged a look. This was exactly how it had started with Karen. One family being systematically targeted by neighbors who couldn't tolerate difference. "Tyler," David said carefully, "why are you coming to me about this?" "Because everyone knows what you did to that racist lady. Everyone knows you're the guy who stops bullies." Tyler's voice gained strength. "The Patels have a daughter my age, Priya. She's scared to walk to school because people stare at her hijab. She's one of the smartest kids I've ever met, but she's talking about asking her parents to move away." David saw Emma watching from the pool, her dark eyes serious as she followed the conversation. She swam over to the edge and pulled herself out, water dripping from her small frame. "Are the bad people trying to hurt another family?" she asked, her voice small but determined. "Yes, sweetheart," David said, kneeling down to meet her eyes. "But Tyler here wants to help them, just like our neighbors helped us." Emma nodded. Gravely, "Then we should help Tyler help them." Out of the mouths of babes, David stood up, his mind already working through possibilities. "Tyler, I'm going to give you my number. I want you to document everything, every complaint, every interaction, every attempt to harass the Patel family. Get it all on record." "But what if my parents find out?" "Then you tell them you're learning about civil rights," Sarah interjected. "You're doing a school project on how good neighbors treat each other. Make them proud of you for standing up for what's right." Tyler's face lit up with hope. "You really think we can stop them?" David smiled, the same cold smile that had terrified Karen Mitchell. "Tyler, I spent 30 years learning how to hunt down people who hurt innocent families. Trust me, we can stop them." As Tyler left with David's number and a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah wrapped her arms around her husband's waist. "You know, we can't save every family facing this kind of harassment." "No," David agreed, watching their daughter cannonball back into the pool with her friends. "But we can teach other people how to fight back. We can show them that bullies only win when good people stay silent." His phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison, got another situation brewing in Phoenix. Family of Iraqi refugees being systematically harassed by their HOA, interested in consulting. David showed the message to Sarah, who sighed and shook her head with fond exasperation. "You're never going to be able to just be a regular suburban dad, are you? Would you want me to be?" Sarah looked around at their backyard, filled with children of every color and background, their parents chatting easily over barbecue and cold drinks. The Rodriguezes were teaching the Kim family how to make proper tacos. Mrs. Patterson was showing the Johnson kids her prize-winning rose bushes. The Garcias were planning a block party for the following weekend. This was what a real neighborhood looked like. This was what Karen Mitchell had tried to destroy with her hatred and fear. "No," Sarah said finally. "I wouldn't want you to be anyone else." That evening, after the pool party had wound down and Emma was asleep, David sat on his back porch with his laptop, researching the situation in Phoenix. The patterns were always the same: systematic harassment disguised as legitimate complaints, coordinated efforts to drive out undesirable families, abuse of official channels to weaponize bureaucracy against the vulnerable. But the solutions were getting easier to implement. Word was spreading through civil rights networks about the Maple Street case. Families under attack were learning to document everything, to reach out for help, to stand together instead of suffering in silence. Karen Mitchell had demanded that his pool be removed overnight, thinking she could bully him into compliance. Instead, she'd triggered a chain of events that destroyed a nationwide hate network and created a blueprint for fighting back against systematic harassment. The pool still sparkled in the moonlight, its surface peaceful and still. But David knew that by morning it would once again be filled with the sounds of children playing, kids from every background imaginable, united in the simple joy of childhood friendship. Karen had wanted to remove the pool to drive his family away. Instead, it had become a symbol of everything she'd fought against: community, acceptance, and the radical idea that a neighborhood was stronger when it welcomed everyone. David's phone rang. Agent Morrison's voice was urgent. "We've got a situation developing in 3 cities simultaneously. Same pattern as Heritage Preservation Fund, but they're calling themselves something new. How quickly can you get to D.C.?" David looked through the window at his sleeping daughter, then at the pool that had started it all. Some people dreamed of quiet suburban lives, but David Chen had discovered something better than quiet. He'd found his calling. "I'll be on the first flight out," he told Morrison. "But Janet, this time we're not waiting for them to make the first move. This time we hunt them down before they can hurt anyone." As David began packing for another battle in the war against organized hatred, Emma's voice drifted down from upstairs. She was talking in her sleep, telling someone about the pool party and how everyone was welcome to swim. That, David thought, was exactly the kind of neighborhood worth fighting for. And if that meant he'd spend the rest of his life removing metaphorical pools overnight, exposing the ugliness buried beneath suburban facades, then so be it. After all, someone had to make sure the bullies never won. The pool lights cast gentle ripples across the water, a beacon of hope in a world that still had too many Karen Mitchells. But it also had people like Tyler Morrison willing to stand up for what was right, and sometimes that made all the difference.